I must admit that I was a little bit nervous about doing this on Zoom. I've never done a Zoom talk before, but it's my pleasure to share the way that I travel, that George and I travel. All of you are travelers in your own ways, and I'm not trying to tell you how to do it. All I want to do today is share with you how we travel. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. I will be reading part of my journals and then just sharing my lessons. Okay. You all know the old adage about not seeing the forest for the trees. Well, I'd like to share with you how I learned to make the most of seeing the world with my husband, George. George is a forest kind of guy, and I am more of a trees gal. Before I met George, I considered myself a savvy traveler, the daughter of an ambassador to 4 countries and the wife of a career naval officer. I had had my share of living abroad in Greece, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Sudan, South Africa, Guam, and Germany, and traveling frequently from those places. I was a travel sophisticate. From an early age, I was accustomed to making my way in unfamiliar surroundings. But when I met and eventually married George, I realized that I had met my match. George was first introduced to me as someone who enjoyed travel. I soon discovered that this was a gross understatement. George is a travel master. He has hundreds of books, files, and bookmarked web pages, and an impressive knowledge of the political world and of the history of art. He also has an insatiable appetite for finding and independently exploring the more obscure corners of our own country and of the world. George avoids tours. Before we met, I believe the only one he'd ever taken was a 3-week trip in 1969 when he visited China with a group of Chinese-speaking art historians. No, George prefers to have full control of the itinerary and the schedule. With his storehouse of information, he knows exactly where to go and what to see, and he works tirelessly to find interesting and unusual places to stay. I will add that he does not waste a moment and considers it a point of personal pride that he does not miss an important site or waste a moment getting there. I'll give you an example. This is an excerpt from a journal entry that I made when we were traveling in northern Spain back in 2003. This is what I write. We took the long way toward Tremp, passing through the most dramatic scenery of our trip, deep gorges and spectacular passes that created some real white-knuckle driving. George kept saying, "Tell me what you see. I've got to keep my eyes on the road." Yes, you do, I thought, and kept the descriptions coming. Eventually, we reached the cutoff for Val de Bois, renowned for its cluster of early Romanesque churches, the finest in the Pyrenees. After savoring the churches and their mountain settings, we walked over to a nearby cafe where we ordered cool drinks as we sat in the shade of a drooping arbor. I enjoyed watching the proprietor's little boy happily digging in the garden. I could have stayed there all afternoon, but suddenly my tour guide hopped to his feet, reminding me that we had places to visit before the day was over. After dragging me away from this idyllic setting, he drove for 3 hours along a series of narrow mountain roads until we came to the turnoff for the monastery of San Juan de Peña, arriving 20 minutes before closing. We parked quickly and clambered up to the cloisters, cornered between a precipice and the cliff face, which provided a kind of roof. The capitals were extraordinary. They had influenced sculpture throughout the region for centuries. Later that night, as we collapsed in our room, George posed the question, Which site would you have chosen not to have seen? And to be honest, I had no answer. They were remarkable, and we had seen them both. As I said, George has the forest viewpoint. Every trip that he plans has a theme, usually based on a time in history with an emphasis on art or architecture. In northern Spain and France, we concentrated on Romanesque art. In the Balkans, our focus was the Byzantine. We drove the length of the Mississippi River with the area's wealth of music as our theme. We witnessed mountaintop removal mining in Appalachia. Terrible. And followed the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky. We explored the Western United States through the eyes of Lewis and Clark. Got our kicks along Route 66 and probed the issues of immigration along the Mexican border. The Mayans were our focus in Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala, and we traced the Arab influence from Morocco through Andalusian Spain. We visited monasteries in the Caucasus and explored mosques in Central Asia. We followed the Silk Road in Western China, and in Russia, we drove the Golden Ring. And just before the pandemic hit, priories, parishes, and pubs was our theme in England and Wales. I have learned that there's little that I can suggest during the planning stage that George has not already considered. He's read the best books and articles on a location. He's visited it before, or he just seems to innately know what not to miss. I eventually decided to give up and concentrate on making our trips worthy of the time that he puts into creating our imaginative itineraries. I determined that my job was to look, really look, for the trees in George's forest. In the 20 years we've been together, I've developed ways to contribute to our unique way of travel. Granted, I'm still running to catch up with him, but I've learned to make the most of each moment. Although I wasn't able to dawdle at that cafe in the Val de Bois, George would have to agree that I have figured out ways to enrich our experiences that enable us to savor our travels long after we are safely home. The following are 6 lessons that I have learned as I wander in Georgia's forests. Lesson 1, use a magnifying glass. Well, maybe not literally, but then again, it might not be such a bad idea. Sometimes the macro setting on my camera serves just as well. Wherever we go, I try to remain acutely aware of my surroundings. I'm always checking out the small stuff, hunting for details. For example, when we were stumbling over the rocks at the Pınar tombs in Turkey, I photographed a delicate thistle pushing up between the stones. Seeing it later takes me back to that spot much more clearly than the wide-angle shot does. When we were visiting the house of the Virgin Mary near Ephesus in Turkey, we were overwhelmed by clouds of prayers and petitions pinned to the surrounding walls. But the impression was far more evocative when I moved in close and picked out one particular message from the Mass. Same is true inside. We visited the home of 20th century Russian poet Anna Akhmatova in St. Petersburg, a modest apartment where she lived until her death in 1966. Although this picture of her study shows the desk where she wrote, a close-up of the light switch conveys a real sense of the simplicity of her surroundings. A hillbilly bubble bath packet for sale said more about the hot dog stand where we ate lunch near Lesage, West Virginia, than this photo of the whole place. The instructions are to cook the bag of beans and eat it 1 hour before bathing. This pipe opening that I noticed on the sidewalk in the old market district of Omaha. Leaning closer, I found an accidental still life, a purple flower, bits of stone, metal, and glass, and particularly evocative, a singed scrap of paper that said only, "When?" Similarly, I never pass up a bulletin board. Often a simple cafe or diner will have a notice board hung up on a back wall. Bulletin boards have given me a wealth of insider information. I found this notice posted at a cafe on Vancouver Island. "There's been a white cat after my chickens for 2 days. We've only shot at it to scare it away. Don't push your cat's luck." Under that, someone had thoughtfully added an orange Post-it note that said, "If it has gray spots, it's a stray cat." What a great little glimpse of local life. On the bulletin board outside the Starlight Theater in Terlinga, Texas, I saw 2 signs together on a crowded board, each posting important questions. The top one reads, "What is the meaning of life? What is our role in our present world? How do we attain constant, serious merriment?" The lower one asks perhaps an equally important question. "In need of an electrician?" In Sitka, Alaska, we noticed as we walked past Ernie's Old Time Saloon that a sign was posted next to one for $2 beers, welcoming the Alaska Airlines Strategic Planning Group. I will add that this notice has not particularly diminished my confidence in Alaska Airlines. Signs are really fun. On Alaska's Richardson Highway, a no target shooting sign was riddled with bullet holes. In Jodhpur, India, we were puzzled by signs advertising child beer until we realized that they were actually advertising chilled beer. In Mumbai, we were instructed to speed safely, but we were going too fast for me to get a photo of that one. Here are a few other signs that were worth staying alert for. No room for domestic violence, except on Sunday. That was in Marion, Indiana. People are strange in Istanbul. We encountered a raft of cautionary signs during our 6 weeks in China, although their meanings were often elusive. I have no idea what strictly prohibit parabolic wooting is, but we tried not to do that. And you can see the other ones. Civilization incense, but fun to see. We found good deals on tummy tucks and breast implants on the Mexican border. And in Hong Kong, I discovered this young man proudly displaying his Chicago Steelers t-shirt. And then there are menus, such as those offering flatly ham of beef and sour milk in Novi Pazar, Serbia. Or in Shanghai, plug the meat river and eel of burning flesh. When we go to a restaurant, I make a point to visit the washroom, not only for its intended use, but also to see what I can find there. Even the wording on the doors tells you something about the place. Roosters and chicks, gents and dames, pointers and setters are some that I found. Sometimes the signs can be a little confusing, especially after a couple of beers, like this one from a bar in the rugged Spinetti region of the Republic of Georgia. I like to check out the graffiti on the walls. "Your boyfriend is a bad kisser," or a scrawled "New Orleans rocks." Gives a little dose of atmosphere. When we attended a book conference in Oberlin College, I noticed a message thread in a stall in the ladies' room in the Science Center. At the bottom of a long sequence in several different hands, someone had added, "I've been reading this since it started, but never written anything, and I'm graduating now. So thanks for providing me such a thought-provoking diversion." Noticing the flyers and posters in storefront windows has offered us insider information that has enhanced many a trip. By taking advantage of such postings, we were able, for $15 a piece, to join a social evening sponsored by the Seward Alaska Arts Council for beer, salmon burgers, entertainment, and a souvenir mug. I even won a pair of silver earrings made in moose pass at the silent auction. We found out about Stupid Tourist Night from a banner hung over the Yukon bar later that night. We listened to funny but good-natured stories and watched a tourist costume contest that was put on by college students who had been working for the summer for Alaska's tourism industry. We got to meet Alaska's own balladeer, Hobo Jim Varsos, and hear him sing "I Am Alaska," one of the highlights of our trip. He played Country Roads for a group from the Czech Republic, and they happily knew every word in Czech. I also look for yard sales. As we were exploring the cold countries of West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky, I spotted a hand-drawn sign for a yard sale in Whitesburg, West Virginia. Persuading George to stop, I walked up and asked if I could take a peek. As I examined the glass jars and bric-a-brac, I struck up a conversation with a sunburned guy with long gray hair wearing a food co-op t-shirt. "What do you think about all this mountaintop removal business?" I asked him. "Mountains of greed lead to rivers of sorrow," he answered. A line certainly worth the price of a jelly jar. Lesson 2, don't forget your other senses. First, listen. Whether the clamor and clatter of a street market in Palermo, the strain of a call to prayer in Istanbul, the chanting of women at a Jain temple in Mumbai, or the creaks and groans of calving glacial ice at Kenai, I savor the sounds of our surroundings, as well as the sights. When we were aboard the Alaska ferry, heading out along the Aleutian chain, a group of Aleut mothers with their small children joined us when we docked at Cold Bay. They organized themselves into booths in the area where we were sitting on the ferry boat. Their conversation was basically mom talk, but I overheard one mother charmingly describe her baby's hair as soft as an otter pelt. In Palenque, Mexico, we got up at 3 a.m. for an early morning trek through the rainforest to see the sunrise from atop Temple 4. Once we climbed the wooden steps to the top of the temple, we were instructed by a guide to be silent and to listen to the sounds of the jungle waking up. As we gazed out over the Grand Plaza, we watched the sky lighten and the sun come up. We heard howler monkeys calling back and forth to each other in their raspy voices, and the mystical song of toucans echoing below. But the sounds that dominated our vigil were those of Homo sapiens, talking, whispering, laughing, sneezing, coughing, the blowing of noses, the popping of soda cans, the cacophony of digital camera beeps, and as a crescendo, the loud ringing of a phone. Next, smell. I like to take time to smell the roses too, even though our travels may not always take us to rose gardens. We stopped to inhale the aroma of street food cooking in vats of hot oil in Guatemala, the scent of incense burning in a Hindu temple, the pungency of a Turkish spice bazaar, the odor of animals on display at an open market in Chiapas. Try a taste. I'm not as good at this as perhaps I should be. George thinks I'm much too fussy about trying street food and local delicacies like ant larvae. But then he has a stronger constitution than I do. I will admit that I liked the crunchy chopolines in Mexico until I found out that they were grasshoppers. George shares the view of celebrity chef and author Anthony Bourdain, who asked, do we really want to travel in hermetically sealed Pope-mobiles, eating only at Hard Rock cafes and McDonald's? Or do we want to eat without fear, tearing into the local stew, the humble taqueria's mystery meat, the sincerely offered gift of a lightly grilled fish head? I know what I want. I want it all. Finally, feel. When we visit a place, I try to open myself up to it and allow the atmosphere to engulf me. This is a piece I wrote from Ketchikan, Alaska, as we sat in a cafe and watched the last of the massive cruise ships as they departed for the season. Again, my journal. As the silent behemoth creeps slowly from the harbor, I could almost hear the sound of the collective deep breath of fresh Alaskan air. Silently, silently, the presence that has filled the skyline departs. Its only sign of life, the intermittent flashes from numberless point and shoot cameras aimed from staterooms that will capture only a reflection of their occupants. Shops that have opened early to accommodate the crowds of couples wearing parkas and Last Frontier ball caps close their doors. The owners return to their lives, to their families. The bright orange Alaska Shirt Company bags are stashed on board, along with the shoppers who have learned all they have time to know about Sitka or Juneau or Ketchikan. As I sit here in the coffee shop window, the town seems to contract and regain its own character, its own self-reliance. It seems to be acknowledging that the departure of these floating towers of commerce means that the long, cold winter lies ahead, before the stores are restocked with Hannah Moose Tana t-shirts and ivory whales made in China, and spring returns, bringing again those invading masses of humanity. Lesson 3, get around like a local. In order to really get a sense of the place, we try to get around the way the locals do, be it the elegant metro in Tashkent, the underground in London, or the Star Ferry in Hong Kong. We attended the Kumbh Mela festival on the shore of the Ganges in Haridwar, India, the largest peaceful gathering of humanity in the world. And interestingly enough, it is in Haridwar again this year, and I cannot imagine all those people during COVID, but this was 12 years before now. The only way to negotiate those crowds was by bicycle rickshaw. A tuk-tuk or motorized rickshaw is an efficient way to see the sights from Ahmedabad in Gujarat to Copan in Honduras. On Malta, we were charmed by the vintage British buses that wheezed and rumbled around the island. George suggested that we should try the unreserved class on the train in India, but I have not worked myself up to that just yet. The platform was daunting enough. Here is a journal entry that I wrote in Delhi. Thoughts from a bicycle rickshaw. The slim young man in front of us stands on the pedals to heft our weight across the muddy, rutted road. Struggling to keep our balance on the narrow, slanted seat, we have a surprisingly intimate view of the crowd of humanity lining the street and contesting space within it in all methods of transport. There seems to be some sort of order in the chaos that is spread before us. The slower hand carts yield to almost everyone else. One of them gets a burst of strength and gently butts the wheel of our rickshaw. We hardly notice, but our driver does. He looks behind and says something. It doesn't sound sharp or rude. He's just communicating something about the situation in front of us. We pass a jam up in the other direction. Impossible to tell what the problem is, other than the fact that it involves an ox cart, a truck, and a car that sits at a 90-degree angle between them. We edge past, noting that few others take much notice. Along the road, we see great piles of canvas sacks, some scattered, others carefully stacked. Men, mostly in unraveling turbans, lounge over them. Other men sit cross-legged on nearby wooden handcarts. Presumably, the bags have been delivered and unloaded. Now it's time for tea and conversation. Vendors crouch along the broken sidewalk. Sliced pineapple, luscious pomegranates, beetle leaves tantalizingly arranged in soft green stacks, sacks of the accompanying areca nuts conveniently displayed nearby. I ask a man preparing a display of vegetables if I can take his picture. Actually, I just motion toward him with my camera. He shakes his head, no. But an old panwala fanning his beetle leaves readily agrees and is pleased when I show him the results here. The scene is full of motion, but of rest too. It all seems to flow in a single benign current, a humanity that accepts its lot and expects no more from life than doing a job, delivering the goods, exchanging a word, and going home, only to do it again tomorrow, as fathers and grandfathers have done for generations. We also like to visit grocery stores or small stalls where the local people shop. In China, I was particularly fascinated by the products I found on the shelves. I don't know what most of the things were, but the interesting packaging and labeling invited a closer look. In Tashkent's food market, a sausage seller, whose name was Miriam, invited me to join her in her booth. My look suggests how relieved I was that she did not insist that I sample whatever it was that she was selling. Lesson 4. Don't necessarily avoid all touristy things. Although George balked at the idea at first, we really got the feel of historic Deadwood, South Dakota by donning Wild West gear and posing for a sepia portrait. Even tacky souvenir photos can add a fun dimension to your memory collection. And riding on the London Eye or drifting down the Seine on a bateau mouche are so popular with tourists simply because they are so special. Lesson 5, to shoot or not to shoot. George and I both love to take pictures. Some of our happiest moments include discovering a temple ruin in Alahan, Turkey, which I'm photographing here, or immersing ourselves in Semana Santa and Antigua, Guatemala. We take off in different directions, taking pictures in our own ways. As I've said, George likes to concentrate on the big things, the towering Chola temple in Tanjavur, Tamil Nadu, for example, while I'm drawn to details like the tiny figure of a woman applying kohl to her eyes, tucked in amongst the astonishing sculptures at Khajuraho. This close-up of a woman's hand that I took in Ohrid, North Macedonia, captures our wordless exchange concerning the cost of a hand-embroidered blouse. Having my camera at the ready allowed me to catch these folks enjoying their visit to Jim Beam in Claremont, Kentucky, as well as the babushka ladies taking a break from their pilgrimage to the Trinity Monastery in Sergiev Posad in Russia. Pictures don't have to be prize winners to be effective. These photos that I snapped along the road in Albania, crossing the Armenia-Georgian border, and descending from the wine area of the Republic of Georgia, each remind us of those difficult drives. I also try to see things from different vantage points. This abandoned grain elevator in Kansas looks far lonelier from down at track level. On the other hand, I recall a time long before I met George when I was with a small group in China in the 1980s, where one man took absolutely no pictures. He left me wondering if perhaps he went home with far brighter memories than those of us who saw everything through a lens. In today's world of smartphones, iPads, and Instagram, we are in danger of becoming obsessed with documenting rather than experiencing. But for me, the joy of taking pictures still outweighs an unencumbered view. I just try to remember not to substitute the picture for the subject. Lesson 6, step out of your comfort zone. In spite of a lifetime of traveling, I am still somewhat apprehensive. I conjure up all sorts of perils, from harrowing drives to Delhi belly to being hopelessly lost. But I've learned that it's when you push yourself that you discover the true richness of travel. Again, quoting Anthony Bourdain, he describes the ideal traveler as relentlessly curious and without fear or prejudice. I'm trying to be that traveler. In Jaisalmer, India, a shopkeeper's wife cooked dinner for us after we tenuously followed her son in pitch darkness down a narrow alley to their home, wondering just where he was leading us. In Kosovo, we drove past K-Force barricades to visit the extraordinary UNESCO-designated Dushni Monastery. At Denali, I swallowed my fear of flying to swoop over the glaciers in a Cessna 172. In Cappadocia, in Turkey, we sailed over the fairy chimneys in a hot air balloon. At Turkmenistan's ancient city of Merv, I managed the steep and slippery climb up to an ancient fort to survey the desert world spread below me. In Palenque, I tried not to look down as I climbed to the top of the Temple de la Cruz, the site's tallest structure, for incredible views of the temple complex. And we enjoyed the thrill as we negotiated Class 4 rapids, rafting through the Santa Elena Canyon in Big Bend National Park. The following journal entry, written in a bar in Homer, Alaska, as we awaited the arrival of the ferry that would carry us out to Kodiak and along the Aleutians, pretty much sums up my pre-trip jitters. We're sitting at the end of Homer Spit at the bar at Land's End, waiting to board the ferry for Kodiak in a few hours. George sits across from me, patiently looking out of the large window by our table. It's a wet and dreary day. I find it hard to differentiate the gray skies from the waters of the bay. I'm looking out for any indication of waves. After all, we are heading out into big waters, a term that got my attention when we were discussing our decision to take the ferry to Unalaska Island at the end of the Aleutian chain run. When I am startled that a fishing boat out to the left is rocking wildly, George points out that a speeding motorboat has just passed it. Oh, okay. I'm feeling pretty exasperated with myself. There's nothing that I like more than experiencing new things and meeting new people. And yet here I am, as I always am, facing my usual anticipatory anxiety. Looking out at those dark clouds, it doesn't matter that the weather report that I have checked every hour or so for the past 3 weeks says that the winds are at 5 miles an hour. I'm still imagining hanging on for dear life in a wild sea, that same sea that stars on TV's Deadliest Catch. My worries are twofold, my hair being a mess and sinking, in that order. But once we board the MV Tustamina, fondly known around these parts as the Trusty Tusty, I hope that what usually happens will kick in. I will be in the moment and surrender the thoughts that fill my too vivid imagination. There's so much I want to learn and experience aboard that 50-year-old veteran of the Cradle of Storms. So it's one of their oldest Alaska ferry boats. What is the crew going to be like? Who are the other passengers aboard this legendary vessel that has been responsible for saving numerous lives during the half century of its own? Who are the people that depend on her for their links with the rest of the world? What is life like for these people who live in tiny communities on those vulnerable islands that dare to reach into the most demanding seas in the world? I hope that this week is full but not too, of excitement. Now, if I could just calm down, I will be ready to attack those 5 mile-an-hour winds and the experiences that come with them. After we returned from one of our 5 weeks of independent travel in India, I wrote in my journal, the sheer unpredictability of travel, the delight of one moment, the disquiet of the next, is what I dread in advance, but love to recall later. And now, coming home. George has claimed the planning part of our travels and has created the forest that we will explore. My specialty is post-trip, the part where the trees part of our refrain really kicks in. I agree with the feeling that author Kate Douglas Wiggin once expressed, that there's a kind of magic about going far away and then coming back all changed. Since my first trip as an adult, I've kept a journal every day that I am away. I know that I will never be able to reconstruct my thoughts once I'm home again. It's hard to remember that all that assails the senses, especially when one moves as fast as we do. We've driven as many as 6,000 miles in a single trip, spending virtually every night in a different place. Sometimes it's hard to remember what we did when I sit down at my keyboard at the end of a long day. I've learned to keep a small notebook in my pocket at all times, where I jot things down as we go along. Scenery that we pass, a bit of conversation that I overheard, my reaction to something that I've seen. Then each night, no matter how tired I am, and I'm awful tired a lot of times, I spend about 2 hours writing. I don't know if anyone will ever read my words, but I'm nonetheless driven to write them. If words make up half of the trees in my forest, images build the rest. You've seen how I love to take pictures of people and details, and how I try to document all that I notice. I also collect ephemera, tickets, menus, tiny treasures that I scan once we get back. Sometimes I even scout eBay for old stamps and cards even before we leave home. We try to send postcards to ourselves as we go along to collect postmarks and stamps from the places that we visit. After George and I have returned from a trip and I am back in my office at home, I find great satisfaction in putting my writing and pictures and mementos together in a record of the forest that George creates for us. These all become part of my personal travel journals. Looking closely at the trees in my forest brought me many years ago to noticing hearts. Tiny stones or large rock formations, man-made or created by Mother Nature, they have enriched my travels for much of my adult life. Among the details that I discover in my travels, hearts are a constant. For more than 40 years, many years before I began my travels with George, I looked for hearts. I have photographed them in more than 50 countries and half the US states. Eventually, I brought them together in a book, which I have now made as a special limited edition. Hearts, Timeless, Universal, Transcendent is a visual essay about our human connections that goes beyond borders and boundaries. With it, I try to encourage others to seek what is good and right in our world. At the end of the road near Newfoundland's northernmost point, I wrote the following in my journal. Cape Onion, Sunday evening. I'm sitting in an Adirondack chair with the white picket fence lawn of the Tickle Inn, proclaimed by David, the innkeeper, to be the northernmost residence of Newfoundland. The setting sun illuminates my view of the rocky shore of the Atlantic before me, and these short minutes of alpenglow bring the ruggedness around me to golden life. I delight in this time, in this most solitary of places, in this most solitary of locations, in this most solitary part of the world. It astonishes me that dramatic scenery like this can be experienced amid the gentlest of breezes, the most temperate of evenings, the most soothing of sounds, as waves grumble against the black stones that line the beach. The sand, too, is black, and its darkness combines with distant storm clouds to offer a stark contrast to breaking waves made brighter by touches of fading sunlight. George and I arrived here early enough to take the coastal path that led us along the shore, through a small pine-scented forest, and up a fern-covered hill for views of the Onion and breaking waves below. In our busy travels, there are perhaps too few of these quiet times, but that makes them all the more treasured. Following the path behind him, watching him stop to take photos of the vista before us while I concentrate on the details, tiny flowers, a peculiar rock, a piece of driftwood, makes me feel close to him. Yes, in this remote place, I have this moment that I will add to the necklace of such moments that we have shared. I acknowledged, especially to this group, that travel is personal and is experienced by each one of us in our own way. But whatever way we choose, it should broaden our minds and enrich our souls. By bringing people together toward greater understanding of each other, just like IWA does, travel is one of life's great treasures. On my last day of our 6-week, 6,000-mile trip through the Balkans, I ended my journal by writing, George's emphasis is the art and culture of these places. Mine is to learn from the people themselves. But perhaps what we glean from both of these emphases brings us the greatest understanding in the limited time we have. On occasion, I found myself gazing longingly at those small private tours with their guide and driver. How much easier it would be not to struggle with bags up a staircase with no railing, in a hotel with no elevator. There's something unique in being on our own to find our way on impossible roads, carry our own bags, be our own tour guides, solve our own problems without the programmed assistance of others. I've had my share of annoyances with George over these weeks, as he certainly has had with me, but our adventures together formed the tightest of bonds. So although we don't always walk arm in arm along shady boulevards, we've gotten ourselves through flooded and potholed roads in Albania, found our way along dark, broken streets in rural Bulgaria, and moved road construction barricades on the outskirts of Munich. It is through George's prodigious interest in the world and his urgency to have me experience it with him that I have been able to sit and contemplate bloody history on the bridge on the Drina in Visegrad, Bosnia. Examine the Dance of the Dead with a flashlight in an old church in Baram, Croatia, and be moved to tears by the Montenegrin guitarist who turned his tiny restaurant in Kotor into a private recital hall for us. Perhaps just as romantic as holding George's hand along the street is trotting behind him to keep up with his determined stride to the next place on his list. It is a challenge to keep him in sight while still looking for the details. But it is those small things among the big ones that allow us to enjoy the forest and the trees.
That's brilliant. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well done,
Oh,
Susan.
really, really.
Totally
Oh,
brilliant. That was absolutely divine. Must
Yeah.
stop. I'm ready to go.
yeah.
Well, thank you all. It's kind of scary when it's silence because you can't tell how anybody feels.
Yes, we were laughing and
Photographs are
giggling.
spectacular.
And
Please
gasping.
keep on going,
Are
Susan.
spectacular.
I want to see more.
Yeah.
Stop.
Wonderful,
Well,
Susan.
thank you so much.
It was
I love the idea that you send postcards to yourself. I'd
That's
never
a great
thought of
idea.
doing that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's fun.
That was really, really, really wonderful and so
Awesome.
inspiring. What a wealth of experiences you have.
Yeah.
And what you've done with it. I mean, and the book.
It's a little bit, it's back and forth because I'm among friends and that makes me feel really comfortable. But when I'm sitting here looking at people like Barbara Calabrese and others who take amazing pictures and others who have traveled amazingly, it's a little bit daunting. So
Nobody's.
I'm exhausted. Watching it, I'm like exhausted.
yes, yes.
But it's so good.
You made me want to get out on the road again.
Yeah.
You think we will be eventually?
Yes,
I
at
hope
some
so.
point we will.
Susan,
Well,
did you ever get sick?
Get sick?
Yeah, on your way. I mean, you know.
Oh, Sonia. I've usually gotten sick like one night. I usually have like one
Like
bad
from
night.
the food you eat or from the traveling. It is so hectic traveling. I
Yeah.
mean,
We seem to manage not getting sick from the being hectic. But I will say that the sickest that we ever were, and we were together, was on the coast of Brava. Yeah. Who would have thought, with all the wild places that we go, that we would have gotten
Yeah.
sick there? We were in a
Yeah.
beautiful place. It was one place that we stayed 2 nights, thank God, because we were both sick as dogs for some reason.
yeah,
Oh.
that's yeah.
But
Yeah, that's,
it's usually like one night I don't feel good or something. But
yeah, but you go with a small pharmacy with you, don't you? Like you travel with some medications and whatnot.
we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Except
Well, it was brilliant.
I keep trying to bring it smaller and smaller. But there's a few things that I must admit, you heard what I said about my hair and so forth. As small as I get my bag, the most important thing I have are my curlers, and they take up a lot of space. But I have to have them.
Hey, Shawma's trying to say
Shawma.
something.
I wanted to say, because Susan would never do this. Susan, your pictures are wonderful, but it's not really your picture or anything. It's the entirety of it. Your humanity just comes through in everything you do. I don't
Oh,
want to travel. I want to travel through your eyes. The way you pick things up are marvelous. You would never say this, but at the end, Susan gave a little link to her ISSUU. It's where she documents all her travels. Perhaps you guys have seen it. If you haven't, it's mesmerizing the way she documents her travels. It's a story tale. It's really a fairy tale being said. And I'm lucky enough to have that heart book she showed at the end. My son, who's 9, and we sit there and we try to, it's a geography lesson for us. We find the hearts, and then he finds on this little globe I have here. He tries to find out, where is this place? I love your presentation. I wish you would do more. Where else
Yes.
in IWA would I meet people like you? It's a joy to know you.
but the books that you saw on the shelf, they're in that
Susan,
website that you mentioned, Shoma.
Susan, I still have your book on love, the Hearts book. It's the best book I have ever had. But also, I put a note in the chat box how great you are putting other people's travel logs together and having them printed by issue. And you did that for me for my around the world trip with Semester at Sea. And I love those books.
Oh, I'm glad.
And I recommend anybody who needs to put together a book to
Sal,
see if you have time to do it.
well, I'll tell you that Sal wanted me to do it, and I said, no, Sal, there's no reason why you can't do it. And so she gave me such a pathetic thing about that she couldn't do it, that I did it. But
So what is that site again?
Should I put it on the chat?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Okay. ISSUU.com.
She does some books.
yes.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. It corrected to issue. I hate that. It's ISSUU.
ISSU.
It
Doesn't have the E at the end.
no E. I don't know why
No.
it's doing that.
No E at the end.
Say it again. ISS.
They great.
It's prescriptive.
There it did. Second time it did it right in the chat.
Carol, it's in the chat.
SRH99.
Got it.
But it's
Thank-
ISSUU. I don't know why they do that. So, well, you want to say something, Franny? You're on mute. You're on mute.
No, I'm not.
Hear you.
Francine.
Francine Friedman was saying, but she's on mute.
Francine, can you unmute?
Francine, you're on mute.
Unmute her, but
Hey, Susan,
It's not-
Susan, I sent you an email. I know a group called Monday Class.
Okay,
They
now,
they would love your presentation.
can you hear me
It's
now?
a poet group.
I can hear you.
Anyway,
Okay, I just wanted to tell you that I used to travel every single year outside of this country. And, you know, so many of my relatives lived in Greece. And so I've gone there 14 times. I've gone to Alaska, France, Italy, England. But the last year and a half, I have not been able to travel even out of Chicago. So here's what I did. I wrote and had my second book. It's a novel published, and I know a few of you have read it, and it's called Beyond the Green, and I'll show you the cover, Beyond the Green, and the green doesn't take place in the backyard. It takes place in Cabrini Green in 1998 in Chicago. And Rick Cogan from the Tribune read it before it was published on Amazon just a few months ago, and he said it's a fine piece of writing, and you can use my quote on the back cover. And I think the reason he likes it is because so many of the characters in that book in Chicago in 1998 are of a different age, a different race, a different religion, a different nationality, but so many of them met for the first time, and so many of them stayed together. So I hope that you'd like to read it. And Amazon, the very first time that they published it, they had a couple of sentences that had spaces and everything between them. But now I told them, correct this. So now it's 100% fine. So anyway, but I love traveling, and all of those places that you know, you just showed us, Susan, were fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Well, I know that you've worked hard to get that book out there, Franny, and I congratulate you on that.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I
have a copy, so.
And I think I might have told you, you know, I used to teach English and journalism at Chicago Public High Schools for years. And my, you know, when my husband died, I was only married once, and he died 23 years ago, and I've never been remarried again. But my children said, why don't you go on Match.com and meet some people? And so I did 13 years ago. But my memoir that I had, and that won 2 first place awards, I called it Match.bomb, because some of the people I met were horrible. So I still live alone, but I just can't wait until I'm starting to travel again, maybe in 2022 outside of the country.
I think we're all waiting to do that.
Susan,
Yes.
I think you all, your talk really gave us incentive to get back out there and start experiencing the kind of things that we have in the past. So, because it's a big world, and we just can't wait to do it. So,
I look forward to getting back in the walks again.
Yeah, well, yes.
Saturday.
Saturday, yes.
Is that for both sides?
What?
For Streeterville will be Saturday.
Yes.
When is the other one?
You mean Lincoln Park?
Yeah, you don't have that one yet.
We haven't set that up yet. We're starting one at a time.
Yeah.
And then the North Shore did Monday.
They did theirs in the snow, though.
Yeah.
Got that right. Susan, did I hear that someone say you wrote, besides your heart book, you wrote another book called Broken Hearts or something? Or did I not hear it correctly?
No, I've written a book about Wilkie Collins, my Victorian writer, but no. Oh,
Okay.
Actually, what it was is I did an earlier version of the special edition. And that
Okay.
might have been what Sel was mentioning. I'm sure it was.
Okay.
And then I came out 8 years later and made a bigger one because we'd done a lot more interesting, gone to a lot more interesting places.
Okay.
That's it.
So yeah, that's
here she is. Yes.
Vicky's holding the first one.
Yeah.
Let me
hold
see.
it.
Oh, okay.
So
You know, there are quite a few of us in IWA who have authored books. So,
yes.
and it used to be during the gala, we used to have a basket full of everybody's books that were auctioned off. I hope we can do something like that again next year.
Sel has an award-winning book too, Never Forget the Pain, right?
Yeah, never forget the pain. You're right.
We will have, our Japanese, instead of a gala, it's going to be a festival. and that's late August. So I don't know that I don't think we're going to do auction items though this is going to be an outdoor festival.
Yeah.
And it's our first one since we've all experienced COVID. So it will be exciting though. But the next time we have something like that, we'll definitely be happy to do our, a basket of books that you ladies.
Good idea.
I bought the basket of books at our gala, and that's how I read Sally Ackley's book, and I read Francis Friedman's
Okay.
And what I learned in Sally Ackley's book that she and I were sorority sisters. So, because it was a lot of her going to college and being an Alpha Delta Pi, which I am as well. So I can give her the sorority handshake when I see her.
See what a small world it is.
I guess we can stay on, but I just wanted to, before people start leaving, thank you really for coming and for hearing my.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, terrific.
Thank
Yay.
you. Thank you.
I could listen to the whole thing again.
Yeah.
Franny, we do.
Yeah.
We recorded it, and also now we have our library. Melissa has worked on that, and so we have our library up, and it's on.
It's like I want to see it again because I know I'd see so much more.
Yeah, well,
You
you can
can.
watch it over and over again.